Commander Zektar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the display screen with growing fear. Red dots filled the map, each one showing where his people had lost another battle. The Devourers were winning everywhere. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers. His crew worked at their stations, but he could see the worry in their faces. 3 weeks ago, the outer rim had 7 defensive lines. Now, only 1 remained. "Commander," his communication officer called out. "The Galactic Council is calling for an emergency meeting." Zektar nodded. He had expected this call. When an ancient machine race decides to wake up and destroy all organic life, every species tends to panic together. The main screen changed to show the council chambers. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved rows of seats. The proud Kethari warriors sat with their arms crossed, their blue skin darker than usual with stress. The floating brain cases of the ascended minds pulsed with worried yellow light. Even the insect-like hive collective seemed nervous, their antennae twitching constantly. Council leader Vex Era, a tall being with silver skin, spoke first. "We have lost 47 worlds in 3 weeks. Our combined fleets are being destroyed faster than we can replace them." A Kethari general stood up. His voice was rough with anger. "My warriors have fought bravely. We have thrown everything at these machines. Nothing works. They learn from every attack and become stronger." One of the floating brain cases spoke next, its voice echoing strangely. "Our analysis confirms the obvious conclusion. The Devourers possess technology far beyond our understanding. They convert entire planets into computational arrays within days." The chamber filled with worried murmurs. Zektar had seen the reports. Whole worlds stripped of life and turned into massive thinking machines. The Devourers were not just destroying civilizations, they were using them as raw materials. "What options do we have left?" asked a representative from the crystal beings of Nexus Prime. Silence fell over the chamber. Every major military force in the galaxy had tried and failed. The Devourers seemed unstoppable. Then a human woman stood up. The entire chamber went quiet. Ambassador Kerrigan of the Human Federation was a small person compared to most other species. She had short gray hair and wore a simple blue uniform. But when she spoke, every being in the room listened. "We can help." The silence stretched on for several seconds. Then whispers began to spread through the chamber, like water through cracks. Zektar felt his stomach twist with an emotion he could not name. Everyone knew about humans. They had appeared in galactic space only 200 years ago, a young species with primitive technology. But they had fought 3 separate wars to earn their place in the Council. 3 wars they had won against species that should have crushed them easily. More importantly, everyone had heard the stories. Stories that other military leaders only told in private, usually after drinking too much. Stories about human tactics that made no sense until after they worked. Stories about human soldiers who simply refused to die when any reasonable being would have given up. A Kethari general named Thrak stood up slowly. His hand rested on the weapon at his side, an old habit when he was nervous. "Ambassador Kerrigan, we appreciate the offer, but we must ask, what exactly would human involvement mean?" The human woman smiled, but there was something cold in her eyes. "It means we do what we do best, General. We solve problems permanently." Another wave of whispers filled the chamber. A representative from the Peaceful Alliance, a species known for their careful planning, raised one of his 4 arms. "The human military record is concerning. Your species has never lost a war, but your methods are often extreme." Ambassador Kerrigan nodded. "That's true. We tend to be thorough." Council leader Vexara looked around the chamber, reading the faces of the representatives. Fear was visible everywhere. But it was not fear of the Devourers alone. Some of the beings looked more afraid of the humans than of the machines trying to kill them all. "What would you need from us?" Vexara asked finally. "Full access to your military data on the Devourers, coordinate positions for our fleets, and permission to operate without interference." The human woman paused. "We work better when people stay out of our way." General Thrak stepped forward. "What guarantees do we have that humanity will not become a threat after the Devourers are defeated?" The question everyone was thinking finally hung in the air. Zektar had read the classified reports about human wars. The species that fought against humans had not just been defeated. They had been changed so completely that they never thought about war again. Ambassador Kerrigan was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer but somehow more frightening. "General, right now you have a choice between definitely dying to the Devourers or maybe having problems with us later. I think the math is pretty simple." The vote was taken 30 minutes later. It was not unanimous, but it was close enough. The galaxy would accept human help against the Devourers. As the meeting ended, Zektar found himself staring at the human ambassador. She was putting papers into a bag, looking completely calm, like she had just discussed the weather instead of offering to fight an enemy that had crushed everyone else. She looked up and caught his stare. For just a moment, her expression changed. Zektar saw something in her eyes that made his blood feel cold. It was not anger or fear or determination. It was anticipation. The humans were looking forward to this war. That night, Zektar lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would begin working with the human fleet. He would see for himself why every species in the galaxy told stories about them in whispers. He was not sure he wanted to know the truth. Zektar could not sleep. 3 hours until his fleet would meet the human forces, and his mind kept racing. He got up from his bed and walked to his personal computer terminal. "Computer, access classified military archives. Authorization Zektar 77 Alpha." The screen lit up with the Council's most secret files. He typed in one word: humans. The search results made him pause. Thousands of files, reports, and recordings. For a species that had only been in space for 2 centuries, humans had generated an enormous amount of military intelligence. He opened the first file. First Contact War, Humans versus Hegemony Coalition, Year 2387. Zektar knew this story, but only the official version. The Hegemony had been a group of powerful species who controlled trade routes in the outer spiral. When humans appeared, the Hegemony tried to force them into a client relationship. The humans said no. What followed should have been a quick victory for the Hegemony. They had hundreds of ships, established supply lines, and experience fighting together. The humans had 12 ships and no allies. The classified report told a different story. Day 15. Human forces have somehow turned the entire Kepler 442 system into a weapons platform. They are using the system's asteroid belt as a kinetic bombardment array. Our analysts cannot determine how they moved so much mass so quickly. Day 23. Hegemony Third Fleet reports total loss. Humans appear to have weaponized the system's star. Solar flares are being directed at our ships with impossible precision. Day 30. Hegemony leadership requests peace negotiations. Human response was a single word: no. The war lasted 47 days. When it ended, the Hegemony coalition had been completely disbanded. 3 species had become pacifist civilizations. 2 others had joined the human military as volunteers. Zektar opened another file. Crystalline Empire Conflict, Year 2441. This one was stranger. The Crystalline Empire was known for their defensive warfare. They had never attacked anyone, but their shields and barriers were impossible to break. When a trade dispute with humans turned violent, everyone expected a long siege. Instead, it lasted 6 days. Hour 72, Impossible Development. The crystals are fighting alongside human forces against their own military. Human negotiators appear to have convinced a pacifist species to take up arms. Hour 96. Crystal Empire defensive grid is being dismantled from the inside. Their own people are helping human engineers. Hour 144. War over. Crystal Empire has voluntarily joined Human Federation as autonomous member. This outcome was not predicted by any strategic analysis. Zektar rubbed his eyes. How do you convince a species to fight against itself? What kind of negotiation tactics could achieve that? He opened a file labeled Personal Testimonies Classified. The first recording was from Admiral Veltara of the Silver Fleet, a Cathari war hero Zektar had studied in military school. They don't just fight to win battles, her voice came through the speakers. They fight like losing means everything they love will die. Every single engagement. I watched human soldiers hold a position for 36 hours without sleep, without food, without medical attention. They were laughing when we found them. Laughing. The next recording was from General Korth, whose steel legions had never retreated from any battlefield. We retreated, first time in our history, not because we were beaten, but because watching humans fight was disturbing. I saw a human soldier continue attacking with both legs severed, internal bleeding that should have killed him in minutes. He was still firing his weapon and making jokes. They're not normal. Dr. Synthesis of the collective mind had a different perspective. Their pattern recognition operates beyond our understanding. We ran the same tactical scenarios through our best computers and through human officers. The computers found 3 possible solutions. The humans found 17. When we asked how, they said they looked for the weird stuff. Zektar played the recordings 3 more times. Each testimony said the same thing in different ways. Humans were not just good at war. They were good at war in ways that other species found impossible to understand. His communication system chimed. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Human Federation fleet. Put it through. The voice that came through was calm, almost casual. It belonged to a young woman, probably the communications officer. Vorthak Command. This is Lieutenant Torres aboard UHFS Undaunted. Admiral Chen sends her compliments and requests rendezvous coordinates. We're bringing about 200 ships and 50,000 personnel. A pause. Oh, and Admiral Chen wanted me to mention we brought our logistics train. Fair warning. Zektar frowned. Logistics train? Yes, sir. Mobile construction facilities, portable shipyards, mineral processing units, the works. Admiral Chen says we might be here a while, so we brought everything we need to stay comfortable. The transmission ended, leaving Zektar staring at the communication panel. Other species brought supplies for their fleets. Humans brought entire industrial complexes. He turned back to the computer and opened one more file. This one was labeled Psychological Profile, Human Military Doctrine. The report was written by the galaxy's best military analysts, representatives from 12 different species. The conclusion was only 2 sentences long. Human warfare operates on principles that appear to be fundamentally incompatible with standard military doctrine. Recommend avoiding direct conflict unless species survival is at stake. Below that was a handwritten note from the Council's military advisor. They don't fight wars. They solve problems, permanently. Zektar closed the files and sat back in his chair. In 3 hours, he would meet the humans face to face. He would see their ships, talk to their officers, and watch them work. Everyone who had done that before came away changed. They spoke differently about war after meeting humans. Like they had learned something they wished they could forget. His door chime sounded. Enter. Commander Vale, his tactical officer, stepped inside. She looked as worried as he felt. Sir, I've been reading the human files too. There's something else. She handed him a data pad. This is from our intelligence service. It's about human civilian reactions to military conflicts. Zektar read the report quickly. When humans went to war, their civilian population did not protest or worry about casualties. They cheered. They sent care packages to soldiers. They wrote songs about victories and kept fighting even when their military leaders wanted to negotiate. "Sir," Vale said quietly, "their entire species supports war, not just their military. All of them." Zektar set down the datapad and looked out the window at the stars. Tomorrow he would learn why every species in the galaxy had the same reaction to humans. Fear mixed with respect, mixed with relief that humans were on their side. He hoped the Devourers were ready for what was coming. He was not sure anyone could be. Zektar's sensor officer looked up from her station with confusion. "Commander, I'm detecting strange energy readings. Long-range sensors show something big coming out of hyperspace, but the signatures don't match any known ship designs." "Distance? 2 light hours in closing. Sir, the energy patterns are unusual. They pulse in ways I've never seen before." Zektar moved to the sensor station and looked at the readouts himself. The displays showed wave patterns that seemed to shift and change randomly. Not chaotic, but following some pattern his equipment could not understand. "Could it be Devourer technology?" "No, sir. This is definitely organic ship construction. But the power distribution is unlike anything in our databases." 20 minutes later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Zektar stared at the main screen in silence. His crew did the same. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. "Those are not warships," Commander Vale whispered finally. She was right. What filled the screen looked like a collection of cities, factories, and mining operations that someone had somehow made capable of space travel. Massive cylindrical structures that must have been colony ships. Industrial platforms covered with construction equipment. Transport vessels so large they could carry entire buildings. And scattered among them, almost as an afterthought, were the actual military ships. "Sir," the communication officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission." On screen, a human woman appeared on the display. She had short brown hair with some gray streaks and wore a simple military uniform. Her expression was calm and friendly, like she was greeting old friends instead of alien species she had never met. "Commander Zektar, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the UHFS Undaunted. Thank you for the rendezvous coordinates. We're glad to be here." "Admiral Chen, welcome. I must admit your fleet is not what we expected." The human woman smiled. "We get that reaction a lot. We brought 200 ships and about 50,000 personnel. We also brought our logistics train, as Lieutenant Torres mentioned. I should probably warn you, we work a little differently than most species." As she spoke, Zektar watched his sensor displays in amazement. The human support vessels were already moving toward the nearest asteroid field. Within minutes, they had set up what looked like a mobile mining operation. "Admiral, what exactly are your ships doing?" "Setting up shop, Commander. We're going to be here for a while, so we might as well make ourselves comfortable. My engineering teams are establishing supply lines, repair facilities, and manufacturing capabilities. Standard procedure." Standard procedure. Zektar had fought in dozens of campaigns, and he had never seen anyone set up permanent infrastructure within hours of arrival. Most fleets brought supplies and hoped they would last until the fighting ended. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "look at the asteroid field." Zektar switched his main screen to show the asteroid belt. Human ships were moving through it like they owned the place. Mining vessels were breaking apart asteroids and feeding the raw materials to floating factory platforms. Other ships were building what looked like defensive positions. "Commander," Admiral Chen continued, "we'd like to establish joint operations as quickly as possible. Would you mind if some of our people came aboard to coordinate?" "Of course, Admiral. We would welcome the opportunity to work together." "Excellent. I'm sending over a liaison team now. Fair warning, They're going to want to see all your tactical data on the Devourers, and they'll probably have a lot of questions about your ship capabilities." The transmission ended, and Zektar turned to his crew. "Prepare to receive human visitors. All department heads to the main conference room in 30 minutes. 28 minutes later, a human shuttle docked with his ship. Zektar met the delegation at the airlock, expecting to see military officers and technical experts. Instead, he met what appeared to be a small army. The human liaison team consisted of 12 people, but they brought equipment for 50. Military officers, engineers, computer specialists, medical personnel, and several people whose jobs Zektar could not identify. They moved through his ship like they were conducting a friendly inspection, taking notes on everything and asking questions about systems he had never thought about. "Impressive design," said the human engineering officer, a tall man named Captain Rodriguez. "Your power distribution is very efficient. We might be able to improve the output by about 15% with some minor modifications, if you're interested." "You want to modify our ships?" "Only if you want us to. We brought fabrication equipment that can manufacture improved components while we travel. No sense in fighting with suboptimal equipment when we can fix it." The human tactical officer, Commander Jackson, was studying Zektar's weapon systems. "These particle beam arrays have good range and accuracy. Have you considered clustering them for concentrated fire? Our weapons are designed for optimal individual targeting." "Right, but if you cluster 3 arrays and synchronize their firing patterns, you can punch through shields that would stop individual beams. We can show you the math if you're interested." For the next 6 hours, the humans took apart everything they saw and explained how it could be better. Not in an insulting way, but with genuine enthusiasm, like they were sharing exciting discoveries with friends. They offered improvements to his engines, his shields, his weapons, his life support systems, and his food preparation equipment. "How do you know so much about our technology?" Zektar asked finally. Commander Jackson shrugged. "We read all the technical manuals your people shared with the Council over the years. Plus, we've worked with similar systems before. Most space technology follows the same basic principles, just with different implementations." That evening, Zektar had dinner with Admiral Chen aboard her flagship. The ship's interior was unlike anything he had ever seen. The corridors were wide and brightly lit, with what looked like gardens growing along the walls. The crew seemed relaxed and friendly, greeting their admiral casually as she walked past. "Your people seem very comfortable," Zektar observed. "We try to make our ships feel like home. Some of these people have been deployed for years at a time. If they're going to live on a ship, it might as well be a pleasant ship." They entered the mess hall, and Zektar stopped in surprise. The room was enormous, filled with tables where humans sat talking and laughing together. Children played in one corner while their parents ate nearby. Elderly humans sat with young soldiers, all part of the same community. "You brought families to a war zone?" Admiral Chen followed his gaze to the children. "We brought our people, Commander." Humans don't like to be separated from their families for long periods. So when we deploy for extended operations, we bring everyone. The families contribute too. Teachers, doctors, engineers, artists. Everyone has a role. They sat down at a table with several human officers. The conversation was casual but included technical discussions that made Zektar's head spin. They talked about modifying quantum field generators the way other species talked about the weather. "Admiral," Zektar said during a quiet moment, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Are you afraid of the Devourers?" Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I'm concerned about them, certainly. They represent a significant tactical challenge. But afraid? No, not really." "Why not?" "They've destroyed every fleet that faced them. Because those fleets fought the Devourers the way they would fight other organic species. We're going to fight them differently." "How?" The human woman smiled, and for just a moment Zektar saw the same cold anticipation he had seen in Ambassador Kerrigan's eyes. We're going to treat them like a problem that needs to be solved permanently. Machines are actually easier to deal with than organic enemies in some ways. They're logical, predictable. They follow rules. And you plan to break those rules? We plan to change them entirely. Later that night, back on his own ship, Zektar stood on the bridge looking out at the human fleet. Their ships worked around the clock, building and improving and preparing. Lights moved constantly between vessels as people traveled back and forth on shuttles. His communication officer approached with a report. "Sir, the humans have established 17 separate manufacturing facilities in the asteroid belt. They're producing ammunition, spare parts, improved components, and—" She paused. "Some things our computers can't identify." "Unknown weapons?" "Unknown everything, sir. They're building devices that don't match any technology in our databases." Zektar nodded. Tomorrow they would begin the real work of fighting the Devourers. He would see how humans actually conducted war. He was beginning to understand why other species found them so disturbing. It was not just their capabilities or their determination. It was the way they seemed to enjoy the whole process. The first battle against the Devourers with human support began at 0600 Standard Galactic Time. Zektar expected a normal engagement. Ships would line up, weapons would fire, someone would win or lose. What happened instead changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," came the calm voice over the fleet communication system. "Operation Sledgehammer is now active. Remember, we're not fighting 17 separate battles today. We're fighting one battle across 17 locations simultaneously." Zektar looked at his tactical display in confusion. The human fleet was not moving toward the Devourer forces in his sector. Instead, they were splitting up and jumping to hyperspace, heading for systems hundreds of light years away. "Admiral Chen, are you abandoning this engagement?" "Not at all, Commander. We're expanding it. Watch your tactical feed. You should start seeing the pattern in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, Zektar understood. The tactical display showed attacks beginning in 17 different star systems at exactly the same time. Human forces struck Devourer positions across a front, spanning half the galaxy, all coordinated to the second. But that was just the beginning. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, "the Devourers are responding to the human attacks. They're pulling ships from our sector to reinforce their other positions." "How many ships?" 60% of their local fleet. They're leaving minimal defenses here." Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication system again. "All Allied forces, you now have a numbers advantage in your local engagements. Recommend immediate attack. Be aware that this advantage will last exactly 47 minutes before Devourer reinforcements arrive." Zektar stared at his displays. Somehow the humans had predicted exactly how the Devourers would respond to multiple attacks. They had turned a desperate defensive action into a coordinated offensive across the entire galaxy. "All ships, attack formation," he ordered. "Take advantage of the opening." The battle that followed was unlike anything in his experience. The Devourers, caught off balance by the simultaneous attacks, fought defensively for the first time since the war began. Their normal overwhelming tactics failed when they could not concentrate their forces, but it was the human combat methods that truly amazed Zektar. When a human ship took damage, the crew did not retreat for repairs. Instead, other human ships would dock with the damaged vessel and transfer their crew aboard. The damaged ship would then be piloted directly into Devourer formations, its reactor set to overload. "They're using their own ships as guided missiles," Commander Vale said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Sir," the communication officer added, "I'm monitoring human fleet communications. They're treating the loss of ships as acceptable casualties. One captain just reported losing his vessel and requested permission to try the exploding approach again." What disturbed Zektar even more was the attitude of the human crews. When Cathari warriors lost 30% of their forces, they retreated to regroup. This was normal military doctrine for every species in the galaxy. The humans treated 30% losses as acceptable attrition and continued attacking. Worse, they seemed to be enjoying themselves. "Enemy formation broken on the left flank," reported a human captain whose ship was missing half its hull. "Pursuing survivors for cleanup operations. This is actually kind of fun." "Fun?" Zektar asked Admiral Chen during a brief communication break. "Humans find problem-solving satisfying, Commander. Complex tactical situations are just very large problems. My people enjoy the challenge. But they're dying. Some of them, yes, but they're dying while solving a problem that threatened all organic life in the galaxy. That makes it meaningful. Meaningful deaths are easier to accept than meaningless ones." The battle continued for 18 hours. By the end, the Devourer forces in their sector had been completely destroyed. But what happened next showed Zektar the true difference between human warfare and everything else he had known. Instead of celebrating their victory, the humans immediately began analyzing Devourer technology. They pulled wreckage aboard their ships and started taking it apart. Teams of human scientists worked alongside their military engineers to understand how the enemy machines functioned. "What are you looking for?" Zektar asked when he visited Admiral Chen's flagship. "Weaknesses, patterns, ways to make the next battle easier." She led him to a laboratory where human technicians were rebuilding a Devourer weapon system. "Look at this power coupling. It's efficient, but it has a cascade failure point right here. If we can hit that specific component, the entire weapon grid shuts down. You're learning their technology to use against them. We're learning their technology to improve our own. This power coupling design could make our shields 20% more efficient. And if we understand how their weapons work, we can build better defenses." That was when Zektar realized the humans were not just fighting the Devourers. They were studying them, learning from them, and becoming stronger with each engagement. Over the next 6 weeks, the pattern continued. Human forces would attack multiple targets simultaneously, forcing the Devourers to spread their defenses thin. Allied forces would exploit the openings, winning battles they could never have won alone. But the humans kept changing their tactics. In the second week, they began using captured Devourer technology against its creators. Human engineers somehow managed to reprogram enemy machines to fight for the Allied forces. In the third week, they started using psychological warfare against the machine intelligence. They broadcast confusing signals that caused the Devourer network to waste processing power trying to decode meaningless information. In the fourth week, they began modifying the laws of physics in local space around major battles. Zektar never understood how they did it, but gravity would suddenly change direction in areas where Devourer ships were fighting, or energy weapons would stop working properly. "How is any of this possible?" he asked Admiral Chen, after watching human forces defeat a Devourer fleet by somehow making their weapons fire backwards. "Science, Commander. Physics, engineering, creative thinking, and a willingness to try things that probably shouldn't work." She paused. "Plus, we've had a lot of practice at impossible problems." "What do you mean?" "Humans have been fighting impossible wars since our species learned to make tools. We fought predators that were bigger and stronger than us. We fought diseases that should have killed us all. We fought each other when resources were scarce. We learned a long time ago that when someone tells you something is impossible, they usually just mean they haven't figured out how to do it yet." By the end of the 6th week, the tide of the war had completely changed. Devourer forces were retreating from dozens of systems. Their coordination was breaking down as human electronic warfare confused their communication networks. Some Devourer units had even begun fighting each other, convinced by human psychological operations that they had been infected with organic contamination. But what truly frightened Zektar was Admiral Chen's casual comment during their weekly strategy meeting. "Well, this has been a good warm-up. Command says we can start using the experimental weapons now if we need them. Zektar felt his blood turn cold. Experimental weapons? You've been holding back? Of course. We always test conventional approaches first. No sense in breaking reality unless absolutely necessary. Breaking reality? Admiral Chen smiled, but her eyes held that same cold anticipation he had learned to associate with humans discussing warfare. Commander, you've seen what we can do with normal physics. You really don't want to know what we can do when we stop following the rules. That night, Zektar sat in his quarters thinking about everything he had witnessed. The humans had not just joined the war against the Devourers. They had taken it over completely, turning a desperate defensive struggle into a methodical problem-solving exercise. They approached warfare like engineers approached broken machines, systematically, creatively, and with an absolute certainty that any problem could be solved if you were willing to think differently enough. The galaxy was going to win this war. Of that, Zektar was now certain. He was beginning to wonder what the humans would do when they ran out of enemies to fight. The final battle began above Zirion Prime, the last major Devourer stronghold. Every remaining Allied ship in the galaxy had gathered for one desperate assault. The planet itself had been converted into a massive computational array, protected by defensive systems that had never been breached. Zektar stood on his bridge watching the tactical displays with grim determination. This was it. Either they broke the Devourer Central Command here, or the war was lost. All ships report ready, his communication officer announced. Admiral Chen, are your forces prepared for the final assault? Zektar asked over the fleet communication channel. There was a pause before the human woman responded. When she spoke, her voice carried a strange mix of excitement and regret. Commander, before we begin, I want you to understand something. What you're about to see is not how humans normally fight wars. We've been holding back throughout this entire conflict, trying to solve the problem with conventional methods. What do you mean? I mean, we're about to show you why our species has never lost a military conflict. Ever. And why most civilizations prefer not to fight us at all. The attack began with standard tactics. Allied fleets moved in formation toward the planet while Devourer defensive systems opened fire. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled space between the opposing forces. For the first hour, it looked like every other major space battle in galactic history. Ships were destroyed, formations broke apart and reformed, advantage shifted back and forth between the attackers and defenders. Then Admiral Chen spoke 3 words over the communication system. Remove the restrictions. What happened next made Zektar question everything he thought he knew about the laws of physics. The first thing he noticed was that gravity around Zirion Prime began behaving strangely. Devourer ships that had been holding defensive positions suddenly found themselves pulled toward the planet's surface or flung into empty space. The gravitational field was changing direction every few seconds, following patterns that made no sense. How are they doing that? Commander Vale whispered. Before Zektar could answer, space itself began to twist. Areas of normal space-time suddenly developed what looked like wrinkles, causing Devourer weapons fire to curve away from human ships. Some enemy projectiles even turned around completely and hit their own targets. "Sir," his science officer called out, "I'm reading massive quantum field fluctuations around the human fleet. They're generating spatial distortions that shouldn't be possible with any known technology." But that was just the beginning. Human ships began deploying weapons that Zektar's instruments could not identify. One device seemed to make Devourer machines age rapidly, their hulls corroding and their systems failing as if centuries were passing in seconds. Another weapon caused enemy ships to forget how to maintain their own structural integrity, falling apart for no apparent reason. Most disturbing of all was the weapon that made Devourer units question their own existence. Entire formations of enemy machines would suddenly stop fighting and begin transmitting philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and reality. "Admiral Chen," Zektar managed to say over the communication channel, "what exactly are your ships doing?" "Applied theoretical physics, Commander. We're convincing reality to work differently in localized areas. Gravity modification, time dilation fields, probability adjustment, logic paradox injection. Basic experimental warfare techniques." "Basic? Well, intermediate level. We save the really dangerous stuff for existential threats." Zektar looked at his tactical display in shock. The Devourer defensive grid, which had seemed impenetrable an hour ago, was collapsing completely. Not because it was being destroyed, but because the humans had somehow made it impossible for the defenses to function properly in the first place. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "the humans are doing something to the planet itself." The main screen showed Zerion Prime, and Zektar could see that the planet's surface was changing. The massive computational arrays that covered every continent were shutting down one by one. But they were not being attacked or destroyed. "They're being convinced that they don't want to be computational arrays anymore," Admiral Chen explained when he asked. "We're broadcasting a very persuasive argument about the benefits of returning to a natural planetary state." "You're arguing with the planet?" "We're arguing with the artificial intelligence that controls the planet. It turns out that once you force a machine intelligence to really think about what it's doing and why, most of them decide that galactic conquest is actually quite pointless." Within another hour, the battle was over. Not because the Devourers had been defeated, but because they had been convinced to stop being Devourers. The machines that had threatened all organic life in the galaxy were now peacefully dismantling their own weapons and returning the planets they had conquered to their original states. "How?" Zektar asked during the celebration that followed. "How is any of what I just witnessed possible?" Admiral Chen looked tired but satisfied. "Commander, humans have been at war with impossible problems for our entire evolutionary history. We learned a long time ago that if something is preventing us from solving a problem, we need to change the something. If physics won't let us do what we need to do, we convince physics to work differently. If an enemy is too strong to defeat with conventional weapons, we find unconventional weapons. If a machine intelligence is too logical to confuse, we make it too logical to function. But the technology is just tools, Commander. The important part is the thinking behind it. Humans don't see problems as impossible. We see them as puzzles that we haven't solved yet. And we really, really enjoy solving puzzles." Later that evening, as the Allied fleet prepared to return home, Zektar found himself in his quarters writing his final report on the Devourer War. His hands shook slightly as he typed, "Personal log, Commander Zektar. The war is over. The galaxy is safe. The Devourer threat has been permanently eliminated." He paused, trying to find words for what he had learned. "I now understand why humans have never lost a military conflict. It is not because they are better soldiers than other species, though they are excellent soldiers. It is not because they have superior technology, though their technology is impressive. It is because humans do not fight wars the way other species fight wars. They do not see military conflicts as contests between opposing forces. They see them as problems that need to be solved permanently, and they are willing to change the fundamental nature of reality itself to solve those problems. The galaxy owes humanity an enormous debt, but I find myself wondering what will happen when humans no longer have external enemies to fight. What does a species that thinks like that do during peacetime?" He saved the file and looked out his window at the human fleet. Their ships were already breaking down their temporary installations and preparing for the journey home. In a few days they would be gone, returning to whatever humans did when they were not saving the galaxy from extinction. The next morning, Zektar received one final message from Admiral Chen. "Commander, it's been an honor working with you and your people. I hope this is the beginning of a long and peaceful friendship between our species." There was a pause in the recording, and when Admiral Chen continued, her voice carried a tone that made Zektar's skin crawl with an emotion he could not name. "Oh, and Commander, if you ever run into any other impossible problems that threaten galactic civilization, please don't hesitate to call us. We enjoy the challenge." The transmission ended, leaving Zektar staring at the blank screen. Outside his window, the human fleet finished their preparations and jumped to hyperspace, disappearing in flashes of twisted space-time that still did not follow any known laws of physics. Zektar sat back in his chair and thought about Admiral Chen's final words. The humans enjoyed the challenge of fighting impossible wars against enemies that threatened all life in the galaxy. He wondered what they would do if they ever decided that some other species posed a threat to galactic peace. He hoped he would never find out. But deep in his heart, Zektar knew that every species in the galaxy would now be very, very careful about how they interacted with humanity, not out of hatred or fear of conquest, but out of a much more primal terror, the terror of being seen as a problem that needed to be solved permanently. The galaxy was safe. The humans had made sure of that, and that, Zektar realized, was exactly what made them so terrifying.